All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Andrew, aka Justice Mindgasms. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to talk about the good and famous slash infamous recent news about Ghislaine Maxwell and R. Kelly both being sentenced to decades in prison. Ghislaine Maxwell was sentenced to 20 and put on suicide watch, and R. Kelly was sentenced to 30 and put on suicide watch as well. I'm going to talk about these events and whether this qualifies as justice, particularly in the case of Ghislaine Maxwell, because she actually, as part of her sentencing, she was sentenced to prison, but a lot of people have been talking about how she wasn't charged with giving a client list of rich and powerful people to whom Jeffrey Epstein, who she helped sexually traffic young girls, she didn't have to give a client list of the rich and powerful people who her and Jeffrey Epstein gave and sold young girls to rape. So is this really justice? Some people, including some of the victims, apparently don't think that it is. And there's some interesting and terrible details about the R. Kelly sentencing as well. So I'm going to go through a video and an article for each of these cases here.
Today was a towering day for justice. As we saw, Ghislaine Maxwell was sentenced to 20 years in prison for the crimes she committed against these survivors and so many others. Today showed us that...
Wait, did I put this on 2x speed? Oh, I did. Oops, sorry. Not everyone likes to watch things at 2x speed like I do.
Today was a towering day for justice. As we saw, Ghislaine Maxwell was sentenced to 20 years in prison for the crimes she committed against these survivors and so many others. Today showed us that individuals can be held accountable irrespective of power and privilege. And today showed us that the chorus of voices of these survivors prevailed and showed accountability. It's really a victorious day for justice. And on behalf of all the survivors we've represented, we want to thank the prosecutors for their fierce and relentless pursuit of justice here. We want to thank the judge for being just and true and thoughtful. And we want to thank all of you for never stopping and continuing to pursue this story and make sure that their voices were heard.
May this sentence demonstrate that it is never too late for the truth to come out and never too...
She's one of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's victims.
Late for there to be accountability. If you're someone who's experienced sexual abuse or exploitation and did not feel safe to report those crimes, or were not believed when you did, or were told that the perpetrators would not be held accountable, this is for you. There's still a lot of work to be done on this issue, but in this fight, we need to celebrate the victories, and today this is a big victory.
Our client, Ghislaine Maxwell, has been vilified, pilloried, and it left little room for her to be treated fairly, because even before she stepped forward into this courthouse, she was being tried and convicted in the court of public opinion.
That's true, but that's because everyone knew that she was assisting and in many cases also molesting, along with Jeffrey Epstein, underage girls and coercing them into being involved in sex trafficking. So that's kind of a justified preemptive judgment, in my opinion, to say the fucking least.
Ghislaine will appeal this case, and we are confident that she will prevail on appeal.
I sure as fuck hope she doesn't. Okay. So, yeah, I sure as fuck hope that they don't prevail. I hope that she fucking rots in prison for the rest of her goddamn life, because that's what she deserves. All right, so I'm going to go into an article about it here as well, which goes into a little bit more detail than that short video there. Right, here we go. Okay, so Ghislaine Maxwell sentenced to 20 years for helping Jeffrey Epstein sexually abuse teenage girls. Maxwell, 60, was a longtime associate of Epstein who died in 2019, just weeks after being indicted. And he, of course, famously, quote unquote, killed himself. Even skeptics like Michael Shermer are very skeptical that he actually killed himself, because it's according to which coroner you ask, it's apparently impossible to hang himself with bed sheets from his bed in the way that he supposedly did. So if Ghislaine Maxwell, she's being put on suicide watch, so if she ends up fucking killing herself, no one is going to believe that she actually killed herself. That's just going to make people's conspiracy theories fucking explode. Ghislaine Maxwell, seen here in 2013, was convicted last December of 5 counts in a U.S. federal court, including for sex trafficking. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison Tuesday. Ghislaine Maxwell, the jet-setting British socialite who once consorted with royals, presidents, and billionaires, was sentenced to 20 years in prison Tuesday for helping the financier Jeffrey Epstein sexually abuse teenage girls. The stiff sentence was a punctuation mark on a trial that explored the sordid rituals of a predator power couple who courted the rich and famous as they lured vulnerable girls as young as 14 and then exploited them. That's good writing. Prosecutor says Epstein, who killed himself in 2019 while awaiting trial, sexually abused children hundreds of times over more than a decade and couldn't have done so without the help of Maxwell, his longtime companion and one-time girlfriend, who they said sometimes also participated in the abuse. The victims said that. In December, a New York federal court jury convicted Maxwell of sex trafficking, transporting a minor to participate in illegal sex acts, and 2 conspiracy charges. U.S. District Judge Allison Nathan, who also imposed a $750,000 U.S. fine, said a very significant sentence is necessary and that she wanted to send an unmistakable message that these kinds of crimes would be punished. Prosecutors had asked the judge to give her 30 to 55 years in prison, while the 6-year-old Maxwell's defense sought a lenient sentence of just 5 years. Yeah, good that she didn't fucking get that. Should have gotten 55 years. Denies abusing anyone. When she had a chance to speak, Maxwell said she empathized with the survivors and that it was her, quote, greatest regret of my life that I ever met Jeffrey Epstein, unquote. Yeah, that's believable. Maxwell called him, quote, a manipulative, cunning, and controlling man who lived a profoundly compartmentalized life, unquote. That's probably fucking true. That seems true. But it doesn't mean that she was not also that way. Echoing her defense attorney's assertions that Epstein was the true mastermind. Yeah, a lot of people have been talking about how maybe he was the true evil, but then other people think that she is more evil than him. There's an interesting documentary series that I think is just called Ghislaine Maxwell that gets into this, whether he was the true culprit and he was just manipulating her as well, or she was actually even more evil than him because she's a woman and she allowed young girls she helped Jeffrey Epstein do this to young girls. So that's an interesting thing to speculate about. Right. Maxwell, who denies abusing anyone, fucking liar, said she hoped that her conviction and her, quote, unusual incarceration, unquote, bring some, quote, measure of peace and finality, unquote. Well, good for her. That's, at least she said that. Nathan, the judge, called the crimes heinous and predatory and said Maxwell, as a sophisticated adult woman, provided the veneer of safety as she normalized sexual abuse through her involvement, encouragement, and instruction. Several survivors described their sexual abuse, including Farmer, who said she and her sister tried to go public with their stories about Epstein and Maxwell 2 decades ago, 20 fucking years ago, only be shut down by the powerful couple through threats and influence with authorities. Yeah, I don't remember whether it was the Jeffrey Epstein documentary on Netflix or the Ghislaine Maxwell documentary that I watched, but they talked about how He hired private investigators to stalk the victims who were trying to rat him out, and he called and made threatening phone calls and all kinds of creepy shit like that. Okay, partners in crime. Assistant U.S. Attorney Allison Moe recounted how Maxwell subjected girls to horrifying nightmares by taking them to Epstein. They were partners in crime together, and they molested these kids together, she said, calling Maxwell a person who is indifferent to the suffering of other human beings. Epstein and Maxwell's associations with some of the world's most famous people were not a prominent part of the trial. Kind of fucking fishy, isn't it? But mentions of friends like Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, and Prince Andrew showed how the pair exploited their connections to impress their prey. That's why some people are saying that this is not actually justice, right? Because Jeffrey Epstein's dead, Ghislaine Maxwell's going to prison, which are both awesome things, but none of Epstein's rich and powerful buddies who he gave and sold underage girls to rape got any consequences soever, and Ghislaine Maxwell did not have to reveal her list that she supposedly has of all of these people were. Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, Prince Andrew, Bill Gates, and plenty of others who hung out with Jeffrey Epstein all the time, especially Bill Clinton, got off totally fucking scot-free with no consequences whatsoever, even though it's pretty clear that all of them were involved with underage girls in some way. Or how much of it was rape is debatable, but all of them did fucking creepy sexual shit with underage girls who were forced to do it either way. So that's why some people think that this is not justice. And I agree that the people who actually raped these girls, other than Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, should also be put in prison for the rest of their fucking lives. Over the past 17 years, scores of women have accused Epstein of abusing them, with many describing Maxwell as the madam who recruited them. The trial, though, revolved around allegations from only a handful of those women. Yeah, even if there were hundreds, it takes some bravery to testify, right? 4 testified that they were abused as teens in the 1990s and early 2000s at Epstein's mansions in Florida, New York, New Mexico, and the Virgin Islands. Yeah, he had a lot of fucking places because he was filthy rich, right? 3 were identified in court only by their first names or pseudonyms to protect their privacy. Jane, a television actress; Kate, an ex-model from the UK; and Carolyn, now a mom recovering from drug addiction, probably due to her being raped as a child. The 4th was Farmer, the sole accuser to identify herself in court by her real name after speaking out publicly. They described how Maxwell charmed them with conversation, gifts, and promises that Epstein could use his wealth and connections to help fulfill their dreams. Yeah, like one in particular, he sent one of them to art school and gave one of them training as a masseuse, but then manipulated her into giving him a hand job or a blow job, and then sometimes that would be a situation that would result in one of the girls being raped. And he also paid girls, and she did too, to go and recruit their friends and they would get paid if they brought their friends to them as well. So that's part of one of the innumerable levels of this fucked up dark pyramid scheme, right? Then they testified she led them to give massages to Epstein that turned sexual and played it off as normal, of course. Carolyn testified that she was one of the several underprivileged teens who lived near Epstein's Florida home in the early 2000s and took up an offer to massage him in exchange for $100 bills in what prosecutors described as a pyramid of abuse. Yeah, like I was talking about. Maxwell made all the arrangements, Carolyn told the jury, even though she knew the girl was only 14 at the time. He apparently, wasn't it Trump? Yeah, I think it was Trump who said something like, yeah, I know Epstein, and he likes girls. He seems to like him young too. Something like that, right? All right, so now go into the R. Kelly shit, and he is perhaps not quite as evil as Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein because he raped less people, but that's debatable whether you're more or less evil depending on the number of underage girls that you rape. But anyway, I'll go into short video and article about the R. Kelly sentencing here too. All right.
This just into CNN, disgraced singer R. Kelly has been sentenced to 30 years in prison. He was convicted of 9 counts, including racketeering and sex trafficking charges.
CNN's Gene Casares joins us from outside the courthouse. Get us up to date. What you hear?
Well, first of all, the sentencing guidelines allowed to be sentenced up to life in prison. So this is 30 years, and R. Kelly is 55 years old right now. You know, there were 7 victims that stood up in court and gave victim impact statements today. They were all very emotional. They were allowed to direct some of their talking to R. Kelly in general. There was one victim that said, I was sexually exploited 23 years ago. And as the years went on, I kept wondering, why is nothing happening here? And then she turned to R. Kelly and she said, now you're going to understand what it's like to not have your freedom. Another victim said that she truly hopes that all can move on from this, and she prays to God that people...
Oh, shit. Sorry, I started playing this at 2 times speed again there. Gonna go back to the beginning.
This and she...
There we go.
This just into CNN, disgraced singer R. Kelly has been sentenced to 30 years in prison. He was convicted of 9 counts, including racketeering and sex trafficking charges.
CNN's Gene Casares joins us from outside the courthouse. Get us up to date. What'd you hear?
Well, first of all, the sentencing guidelines allowed to be sentenced up to life in prison. So this is 30 years. And R. Kelly is 55 years old right now. You know, there were 7 victims that stood up in court and gave victim impact statements today. They were all very emotional. They were allowed to direct some of their talking to R. Kelly in general. There was one victim that said, I was sexually exploited 23 years ago. And as the years went on, I kept wondering, why is nothing happening here? And then she turned to R. Kelly and she said, now you're going to understand what it's like to not have your freedom. Another victim said that she truly hopes that all can move on from this, and she prays to God that people can heal. Another victim stood up with her father at the podium, and she said, my father was sexually abused when he was young, and he didn't sexually abuse me. Now, that was in response to the mitigating factors that the defense actually put on. There are documents that have been unsealed in the last few days related to the sexual abuse that R. Kelly had when he was beginning to be 6 years old. It's alleged in those documents that family members, others, family friends started sexually assaulting and abusing him from 6 onward. One relative even began to take pictures of him. And the defense used this to try to mitigate a lifetime sentence for R. Kelly, saying this in part is what caused him to be who he was, and that a forensic psychiatrist determined he was...
Yeah, that's sad. That's sad. That's even more dark, right? That he was molested as a child. That unfortunately often seems to be the case with pedophiles, that they were molested as children too, and then it's just an endlessly negatively synergistic loop of abuse, or a negative circle of abuse rather. And it reminds me of this documentary I watched about, I forget who it was, but it was one of those many Catholic pedophile priests, and this seemed to happen a lot, who raped hundreds of kids, and he just got moved around from parish to parish. And at one point in the documentary, they talk about how he was molested by his brothers when he was a child, and his brothers were molested by his father. And this is just... it's like a fucking disease. It's like a contagious disease. It's just so fucking awful.
Not a pedophile, but it was just a result of...
So he wasn't psychologically diagnosed as a pedophile. Well, whether... I don't think that really matters, because he did pedophile acts, whether he was psychologically a pedophile or not, obviously.
The abuse. But in sum, he was convicted of 9 counts here, very serious felonies: sexual exploitation of a child, bribery, and sex trafficking across state lines, forced labor. Back to you.
All right. So, oh yeah, I'll go into this article here as well. All right. So, R. Kelly's been placed on suicide watch at the federal detention facility in New York, where he is being held after he was sentenced this week to 30 years in prison on racketeering and sex trafficking charges, his lawyer said Friday. I wonder what the racketeering charge was about. I didn't hear about that. But the disgraced R&B singer is not suicidal, attorney Jennifer Bongine told CNN she believes, adding Kelly had been fearful of being put on suicide watch. The irony of putting someone on suicide watch when they're not suicidal is it actually causes more harm, Bonjean said. Kelly's attorneys later filed a lawsuit and moved for a temporary restraining order. The complaint names the Metropolitan Detention Center, MDC, of Brooklyn and its leading officials, as well as the United States government, as defendants. According to the lawsuit, attorneys for Kelly called the detention center following his sentencing to learn of his status, and employees repeatedly hung up on them, laughed, and were highly unprofessional, apparently. CNN has reached out to the U.S. Bureau of Prisons and has attempted to reach the MDC Warren for comment. Bonjean earlier said she was told by prosecutors who spoke with prison officials Kelly, 55, was placed on suicide watch because he is well known. She says it's punishment for being high profile, and it's horrifying, frankly, she said. To put someone under suicide watch under those conditions is cruel and unusual when they don't need it. Yeah, well, I personally am not going to lose any fucking sleep over R. Kelly getting cruel and unusual punishment. But I didn't know that if that's true, that's interesting, that if you're a high profile client, you're often put on suicide watch as further punishment for your crimes. If that's true, that's interesting. And some people deserve it, but obviously some people don't, because some people are innocently convicted. Obviously, it sure as fuck seems like virtually a guarantee that Ghislaine Maxwell and R. Kelly are guilty, though. So, I'm glad that both of them are put on suicide watch for that reason. If it makes them suffer more, they deserve all the suffering they can get, other than being killed, because I'm against the death penalty. But I hope they rot in prison and are raped and depressed for the rest of their fucking lives, because that's what they deserve. NBC Brooklyn has a policy of punishing high-profile inmates by placing them under the harsh conditions of suicide watch, even though they are not suicidal, the lawsuit alleges. So that's what his lawyer's saying. So obviously that's biased. Bonjean is also seeking a temporary restraining order to remove Kelly from confinement. Bonjean said she had asked Kelly to email her after he was taken back into the federal facility following his sentencing Wednesday, but never got an email from him. She hasn't gotten answers about his status from the detention center until prosecutors requested information from the facility, Bonjean added. A jury convicted Kelly last September on 9 counts, including 1 charge of racketeering and 8 counts of violations of the Mann Act, a sex trafficking law. Prosecutors from the Eastern District of New York accused Kelly of using his status as a celebrity and a network of people at his disposal to target girls, boys, and young women for his own sexual gratification. I didn't know that he targeted boys, but I knew that he targeted girls and young women. The 5-week federal trial in Brooklyn included testimony from witnesses who said they were sexually and physically abused by Kelly. The court also heard from people involved with orchestrating the disgraced R&B singer's 1994 marriage to the late singer Aaliyah. That's the most famous aspect of this whole story that everyone's heard about, right? I heard about that years ago, that he married Aaliyah when she was 15. Marriage to the late singer Aaliyah when she was just 15 years old, and he was an adult after she believed she's gotten pregnant. So I didn't know that last aspect of the story. I knew that he married her when she was 15, but I didn't know that it was because she thought he had gotten her pregnant when he was an adult and she was 15. So that's pretty fucking dark. Prosecutors had asked the judge to sentence Kelly to more than 25 years behind bars, while his defense attorneys asked for 10 or fewer. Of course, Ghislaine's lawyer asked for 10, R. Kelly's lawyer asked for 10, or Ghislaine's lawyer asked for 5, R. Kelly's lawyer asked for 10 rather, and then she got 20 years and he got 30 years. I think it would have been better if they had got the maximum sentence possible, but hopefully that's long enough that they'll both fucking die in prison. And I sure as fuck hope they don't get out early on parole. That would be fucking awful. They deserve the harshest punishments other than death, because like I said, I'm against the death penalty, even for fucking serial killers and rapists, because often they have families too. And I used to be for it, for people like pedophiles and rapists, but what changed my mind about that was the documentary called Into the Abyss, that documentary by Werner Herzog. And it's because innocent people get executed when the government is allowed by law to execute prisoners, as happens a lot. And Also, even the worst people in the world often have families, like R. Kelly and Ghislaine Maxwell's families. They don't deserve to be punished, and the family members are those who are punished when their terrible person of a family member gets executed, and they deserve to be able to visit these awful people in prison because they are their families. But anyway, like I said, I'm glad that they're receiving harsh sentences. Both Ghislaine Maxwell and R. Kelly are going to prison for 20 years and 30 years, respectively, and put on suicide watch. And I hope they rot in prison for the rest of their lives and are miserable for the rest of their lives as well. So, all right, wanted to tell you, everyone, about that great news. Some measure of justice has been gotten. At least they're both gonna go to prison for the rest of their lives, which is great. It would have been better, particularly for Ghislaine Maxwell, if, as I said, all of Jeffrey Epstein's rich and powerful buddies, like Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, Bill Gates, Prince Harry, etc., had gotten prison time and other sorts of punishments as well, but they got off scot-free. So this isn't as much justice as we could get, but it is still good nonetheless. All right, so thanks everybody for watching. I hope you enjoyed that very important news. I like to actually try to talk about important news sometimes, for sure, because this is like fucking historic, I would say. And yeah, thanks everyone again for watching. Click that subscribe button and click that bell to be notified when I come out with new videos. Click that like button, share this everywhere. Check out my Patreon page. The link is in the description of the video as always. And if you give me $10 a month, I believe it is, you can vote on the next topics, books, and movies that I will discuss both by myself and with others. Check out the last podcast that I did with my friend Dusty about the movie Taxi Driver, of course, the famous Martin Scorsese movie starring Robert De Niro, which was one of, if not the first movie about mass shooters, PTSD, the Vietnam War, and child prostitution, oddly enough, which is similar to what Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell were doing, of course. And then also check out, probably for my next video, if I finish it, I'm going to talk about season 4 of Stranger Things, because I know that's the most popular streaming series of all time, the most popular English language ones. It's the most popular other than Squid Game. So I'll talk about that, or I'm going to release a Tremor clip from one of my other videos. And then this weekend, I will be talking with Dusty, aka the Woke Centrist, as I often do, about the book called Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman, who's an awesome fantasy author. And obviously, it's about Neil Gaiman. So look forward to all of that. Thanks again, everyone. And always remember this: I love you all. Keep being a tiny beam of light that shines through the almost impenetrable darkness in the universe. And most importantly, always remember this: the funk cures all, and groove is in the heart. And Ghislaine Maxwell and R. Kelly are fucking awful abominations of people, and some measure of justice has been served. So that's great. All right, thanks again, everyone, and adios until next time.